Hey kids, welcome to lesson 5.8, Scope and Access. The scope of a variable is defined as where a variable is accessible and where it could be used. The scope is determined by where you declare the variable when you write your programs. When you declare a variable, look for the closest enclosing curly brackets for its scope. So the curly brackets are a good idea of where it's confined to. Java has 3 levels of scope that correspond to different types of variables. We have our class level scope. These are our instance variables right here. These are inside a class. We have our method ones, and these are our parameters for our local variables. And then we have block level. These would be like our I for index or iteration when we progress through a loop. And again, you can see you can't access a variable outside of the scope of the curly bracket. So just be aware of that. It is a pretty good image, kids. And really, as long as you understand this, this lesson is pretty easy. Click on all the variable declarations that are class level. Well, the class is right there. So the 2 variables are those 2. Click on the variable declarations that are the method level. So these are the declarations. And if you can see, I have string here, and string here. These are really just setting my constructors to my instance variables. So it's really the first 2 right there. Local variables are variables that are declared inside a method, usually at the top of the method. These variables can only be used within the method and do not exist outside of the method. Parameter variables are also considered local variables that only exist for that method. It is good practice to declare any variables that are used by just one method as local variables in that method. That means if it's going to be used a lot, declare it there. Instance variables, a class scope, are shared by all the methods in the class and can be marked as a public or private with respect to their access outside of that class. They have class scope regardless of whether they are public or private. Another way to look at scope is if variable's scope is where it lives and exists. You cannot use the variable in code outside of its scope. The variable does not exist outside of its scope. Just an important sentence there, kids. Try the following code to see that you cannot access the variables outside of their scope level in the string method. We're going to try to fix those errors using variables that are in a scope or moving the variable declarations so they have a larger scope. So that's what we're going to do with this one. Let's see our errors first here, kids. Looks like we have one with ID, and it looks like we have one with the email down there. So email and ID. Well, let's go up here, kids. And let's stretch this a little bigger. And if we take a look, we have our class person. We have 2 strings, a name and email. We have our constructor, initial name, initial email. Those are set there. We have our 2-string string. And then inside our loop, we have a for loop that says, hey, as long as I is starting at 0 and I is less than 5, we're going to keep going up. And then we are setting an ID in there. That's unusual. So this one's scope is inside just here. We can put it there. So really can only be accessed for that for loop. And then can we access that there? So this is trying to print in here. I don't know if that's going to work, kids. I think we might have to do something a little different with that. Down here, we have our return initial name and initial email. Well, kids, that looks weird right there because those are really set up for this one. I don't know if those can access that. I know they can access name and email. So I think that one's wrong. And then our method here, we're creating a new person and then printing out a P1. Well, I think if I just change this to, what was it, name and email, to just a name and email, I think that's going to take care of that one. And then over here, I think if I take this variable and just move this outside of the scope of the for loop and hit run, I think that's going to work. We do have one more error, kids. So we have trouble accessing I there. Well, that's because we have ID set to I. And really what that needs to be set to is a 0. Let's save and run it now. Oh, and we're forgetting an important part here, kids. We have to move what we want to be printed in there. So if the I is there, we're going to move that over there. ID has access over there. I has access in there. That should fix that, kids. Let's see if I'm right. There we go. So as you saw, the scope, I even forgot to put something in my for loop, kids. What am I thinking here? So the ID over here has scope outside of it, and then the I on the inside can pick up here. So it'll print off there. And then we can access name and email. We just can't access the initial name email parameters. If there's a local variable with the same name as the instance variable, the variable name will refer to the local variable instead of the instance variable as seen below. We'll see in the next lesson that we can distinguish between the local variable and the instance variable using the keyword of this to refer to the object's instance variable. And kids, we're not going to go too much into this because really the entire next lesson is about this. But to see right here, let's hit save and run. As you see, we get printed off here the name, Sonia at Gmail, and unknown. When we go up to print, we are getting the string name unknown. So what's happening in this one, we're getting printed unknown and Sonia at Gmail. And if you look up here under our string, we have it too. We have name equal unknown and name equal this. So under this instance, and with our name here, it doesn't know what to print. So it just prints off both. We can check this by just adding a 1 here and going to save and run. Now that we named it a new variable there, kids, it's picking up the right name and the right email. So you can just see when we use the same name, it gets confused. It's a lot like me, kids. But again, we're going to spend a whole next lesson on this, so we're just going to move on. Debug the following program that has scope violations, and then add some comments that label the variable declarations as class method, block, or scope. And let's take a look here, kids. Let's hit save and run and see what our errors are first. Looks like we're having trouble accessing this numerator. We're having problems in our if statement accessing the variable d, it looks like. And it doesn't look like it knows what this new numerator is. We have a couple things to debug down here. Let's keep those in mind as we go along. We're going to start up here. We have our tester class. We are printing off 2 things here. We are printing off F1, which is just a blank. And then we're trying to print off F2, which is 1 divided by 2. And you can see we're going up here. And we are directly calling to it F2 numerator divided by F2 denominator. If you come down here, we have our class fraction here, and that's an integer numerator and denominator. Those are our instance variables. We come down here, we have our first fraction, int d1, and the numerator is equal to d, and the denominator is equal to d. We can change this if we want, kids, but we can just leave this as is. There's really not an error there. Next, we're going to come down here and we have our constructors, int numerator and int denominator. Those are going to be set to our numerator and denominator. And if we come down here, we just have a public toString. And kids, remember, if we have a toString, we usually have to use a get method, and it doesn't look like we have any get method. Doesn't look like we can access any of this. So it looks like all of this needs to be reworked. And I think that's where our error is at. Well, let's rework down here first. We have if denominator equals a d. And kids, we don't want the denominator to equal d. We want it to equal 1 up there. So first off, we want to double check to make sure it equals that number that is right there. And in here, we have an int numerator equal 1. It looks like we're declaring a new numerator. I don't think we need to do any of that, kids. I think we can just get rid of that right there. And this looks like it's closing this statement, and then this is attached to the big public string. I think we can pull both of these in here and return both. So we're just going to go here and just go return. Now, let's talk about this real quick, kids. And we don't have a numerator. We can just go to numerator. And what we're going to do is we're going to create some access to this numerator here. Over here, we also have another problem. This is a string. And if you look down here, kids, this is a string. We have some text here. But, this should just be return numerator. We're already checking if it's 1, so we don't have to worry about that. But as you can see down here, kids, now this isn't a string anymore. And because of that, we are going to run into an error no matter what we do. And I'm just going to leave this because we're going to come back to this because I want to talk about this in a minute. We're going to fix up the rest of it and come back. This is going to be our error spot right here. We're going to come back to that in a minute, kids. So let's not worry about that. Let's go ahead and hit save and run. And we're getting this error over here. And on line 41, it just means I have an extra curly bracket somewhere. Well, that extra curly bracket is just right there. So just go ahead and delete that one. Let's save and run. We should still get our one more error here. And we do. So we still have our error of our return numerator we have to deal with. And then we have to talk about this f2.numerator. Because we have numerator and denominator declared private up here, it doesn't have access. And we could do some different things to give it to that, but we can't print it off that way. What can we do? Well, we can do a couple of different things here, kids. Number one, let's test our theory by commenting this out. Second, let's talk about this error spot real quick. If you notice, this right here, kids, is a string, right? This is a little quote right here. And up here, we don't have that. We have an integer, and it's going to keep giving us an error down here. And it's just going to say it can't be converted to a string. Kids, we can do one of two things to fix this. We can either just make this into a string if we want. So we can just simply do plus nothing. But we can also do, and you have to remember way back, kids, the integer to string method for a numerator. So integer to string, string. I think that is right, kids. So in that aspect of this should fix it and give us a numerator. And then this doesn't matter because we have our numerator and denominator and it's already a string. So we should get the return value right. Now with the other one up here, our fractions, we coded this out to see if this was our issue. So let's go ahead and hit save and run. Ooh, looks like we have a spelling error. I think that's an uppercase I, kids. Oop, I got a spelling error. That's why it is. There it is. Have to make it go green, kids. And you can see we printed off 1. That doesn't get our second one here. And the reason again is we don't have access to those numerators and denominators. What we do have access to is this level up here. So all we really have to do is call to F2. So if we just go F2 here, take away that, we should get our 1 and 2. And if you see, well, that's what we had to get back there, kids. So well, that's what we had to do. We just had to make sure we had access to the variables we had. We can't call directly towards a fraction because a fraction has these variables is private, so that wouldn't work. But we can call directly to F2 perfectly fine. And then down here, we had our issue with 2 things. We had to have the denominator set to 1, not set to D, because we didn't have access to that variable there. We had to set it to the number. And then we had our numerator. We had that to a return. We didn't equal it to anything. And it threw another error that it was looking to be a string and it was returning an integer. And that is because the numerator didn't have a string in it. And you could have simply added this part of the code, or if you thought to the Wayback Machine, use that, kids. Well, that's how we do the programming challenge there. We have our summary. Scope is defined as where a variable is accessible or can be used. Local variables can be declared in the body of constructors and methods. These variables may only be used within the constructor or method and cannot be declared to the public or private. Where there is a local variable with the same name as the instance variable, the variable name will refer to the local variable instead of the instance variable. And that was that one above it. Again, kids, that's all next lesson, so don't worry about that. Formal parameters and variables declared in a method or constructor can only be used within that method or constructor. And it looks like we have some AP questions here. Consider the following class definition, which of the following best explains why the class will not compile. We have our class party. We have a private integer, boxes of food, a private integer, num of people. We have a public party, and that's n of people, food boxes, and num of people equal boxes, and boxes of food equal food boxes. Down here, we have the non-return order more food, and it has additional boxes in here. Integer update amount of food equal boxes of food plus additional food boxes. And then boxes of food equal updated amount of food. Then we have our void eat food boxes, and that integer is eaten boxes, probably a lot for me. Boxes of food equal updated amount of food minus eaten boxes. I think my error here is with my update amount of food. You can see, kids, this is a local variable here, and it's being called outside of these. So I don't think that's going to actually work. Let's see if there's something that says that. Class is missing an accessor method. That's not a big deal. Instance variable box of food. No matter. Return type of party constructor is missing. That doesn't matter. We can return all or none. Variable update amount of food is not defined. And there we talked about it. We don't have that variable defined anywhere, so we don't know what it is. I think that's it. The party class is missing a constructor. That doesn't matter. Hey, there we go, kids. Consider the following class definition: a class movie. We have a integer current price, integer movie rating. We have a public movie, and we have two constructors, a P and R. That's a current price and movie rating. We're going to get the current price if the integer equals 16. We're going to return current price. Then we have a void public price, and that's printing off get current price. We have a question down here. Which of the following reasons explain why print price method is broken and only ever prints out a value of 16? Well, kids, if we look here, we have current price is a private instance of variable, and we also have a variable current price in the method, kids. And remember up there, it just said when the local variable with the same name as an instance variable, the variable will refer to the local variable instead of the instance variable. So this is saying, hey, it's always going to print 16. So let's look down here and see if we have something that says that. Yep, declares a local variable. Always use that one. I think that one's right, kids. Yay. There we go. Hopefully you found this video helpful, kids. As always, if you have any questions, come see me. Otherwise, I'll see you on the next video, kids. See you later.